Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we are going to talk about a book called Lighting the Way, subtitle, and a very important one, 9 Women Who Changed Modern America. And joining us is the author, Karenna Gore, and the book is published by Miramax Books. And yes, it's that Karenna Gore, the daughter of the former vice president. Get that out of the way, and now let's talk about you and the book. A woman by the name of Mary Beth Norton says something very nice. So nice you put it on the jacket.
Yes, I'm quite grateful.
Mary Beth is the author of Liberty's Daughters. This lively popular history, she writes, will introduce Americans to a group of courageous and influential women about whom too few of us have known too little. Thanks to Karenna Gore, that's about to change. So speaking of introducing people, one of the things that impressed me about your book from the start is that it has a wonderful introduction, one of the best I've seen in a long time.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really wanted to explain a bit of why I wrote the book and what I brought to it. So I talked a little about my family and my own thoughts on politics and history.
Yeah, and the great virtue is that it's concise, it's informative, and it's inspiring. It doesn't go on forever. It's only about 5 pages, and you talk about the fact that though your exposure to politics has been from a privileged vantage point, even you, after 2000, became subject to the pervasive cynicism about the political process.
Yes, I have to admit.
Understandable.
Yes, that is true, and it's something that I think is a real problem, particularly among younger generations. Mm-hmm. That there is this real disengagement with the political process and suspicion of it.
I don't think it's just the younger generation.
No, I suppose you're right. But one of my roles in the 2000 campaign was actually to try to reach out to younger potential voters. And I did find that there's a lot of cynicism there. And I certainly have flirted myself a bit with that cynicism. I was very disheartened by 2000. And I just wanted to reconnect to what I had grown up loving about politics, and that is not the who's ahead in the horse race at any moment, and who's scoring political points, or the superficiality or the spin of it all, but the real nitty gritty of public service, of us as Americans being masters of our own fate and individuals who are willing to stand up and sometimes stand against the tide to change things.
Yeah, so you sought out the stories of women who fought against cynicism, and they always try, every one of them, to keep politics grounded in public service, which is what we seem to get farther and farther away from.
Yes, absolutely.
These are behind the scenes public servants, I think you call them at one point, mm-hmm. and journalists and agitators and union organizers.
Well, I think there are lots of different ways to serve the public, so it was exciting to explore those ways.
Now, these women, all 9 of them in the book, have some things in common. They believe that every person matters, no matter the background, and they each should have an opportunity to succeed.
Absolutely. And I think in many ways, although these women could be described as progressives in the sense that they were challenging social mores and changing laws and policies, I think they were all, in essence, trying to make our country truer to its founding ideals, to make it a place where truly anybody, no matter what their background, could have the opportunity to succeed. The
other thing that struck me in each of the profiles is that each of these women was very much a grassroots kind of person. They were somewhat aloof from, organizations. They want to get in there and do it. Yes, I think that's true. And I was sort of fascinated to see how political movements can be built
or more often than not, built from the ground up, and there's a groundswell that eventually reaches those in power and politicians, but that it starts with people who don't necessarily have that much power on their own, but with leadership like these women provided, can come together and change things.
And they're people who really care.
Absolutely, and respected those that they advocated for very much. There was no condescension or hypocrisy, which I think is very refreshing.
That's right. The other thing that they did a lot of is what we would call networking. Now you talk about getting friendships and all that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
It really surprised me, because this is a book that starts in the 19th century, goes through the 20th, and comes right here into the 21st. Now, always talking about what women can do. And these stories, I think, are going to stick with us for a long time. And one of the human needs that you mentioned in the introduction is chemicals in factory workers. We're going to talk about Alice Hamilton when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Lighting the Way, 9 Women Who Changed Modern America. That's the title of the book. Joining us, the author, Karenna Gore. The publisher is Miramax Books, and a woman by the name of Glenda E. Gilmore with a huge title. Peter V. and C. Van Woodward Professor of History at Yale University. I hope she gets paid twice. Karenna Gore, she says, recaptures the lives of 9 women who entered public life, even as she illuminates the practice of women's politics in celebrating a varied group of women who changed the course of 20th century America. Indeed, they did. Schiff reminds us that the ultimate purpose of politics is public service, not personal gain. Lighting the Way pierces the gathering gloom and cynicism surrounding contemporary politics by reminding us that leaders emerge in the darkest days and that change is possible. Mm-hmm. And that's what people out there listening today should remember, that this is a fascinating and a very hopeful book. One of the fascinating people in it is a woman by the name of Alice Hamilton. Alice Hamilton is interesting in a number of different ways. She comes from what we'd call a well-placed, wealthy family, and somehow gets involved with working, if you will, for and with the poor. The first influence, I think, or the first way she gets there is her being influenced by Jane Addams and Hull House. How did she get connected there?
Well, absolutely. She was from a somewhat genteel background, Fort Wayne, Indiana family. And she had a remarkable sister, Edith Hamilton, who was a classicist and very influential woman also. But Alice...
But the whole family was very educated and bright, and upon the insistence of their parents.
Yes, absolutely. And I enjoyed writing about the Hamilton family and the education that they had at home. Alice became a physician in the late 19th century, which, of course, was no small feat for a woman in and of itself.
Right.
She then went to Hull House. She'd heard Jane Addams speak and was very attracted to her mission, which was obviously to help the immigrant poor in Chicago. And Alice went. She went to Hull House and she worked as a physician there. She opened up a well baby clinic as one of her main tasks, and helped care for the infants of the immigrant poor in that area. And she also got very involved in public health, and she saw the connections between occupations working with chemicals, dangerous new chemicals whose effects weren't understood. They were so new in the Industrial Revolution.
She actually is a kind of pioneer in what we now call, industrial medicine? Absolutely,
in workplace safety and public health. She discovered lead poisoning and mercury poisoning in these jobs where they weren't being addressed, and largely because the workers were so powerless.
No, and the other reason they weren't being addressed, you mentioned again in the introduction, is that this was a field that they felt was tainted with socialism. Other scientists did, male scientists, that it was tainted with socialism or with feminine sentimentality for the poor.
Yes, I thought that was a fascinating quote from Alice Hamilton's own letters. And she said that she felt her special responsibility to address this because she saw that taint keeping qualified male scientists away. And what she did was truly remarkable. She was tapped by the governor of Illinois to lead an investigation within that state of all of the, as she called them, dangerous trades, and led the way towards some regulation of those chemicals. Then she led national surveys and became her influence culminated in the New Deal. She was also the first woman who was invited to join the Harvard faculty in 1919.
Yes, but don't forget there were two perks she was not allowed to have. One was she couldn't participate in commencement ceremonies, and she could not have faculty football tickets, the poor dear.
Right, exactly. Well, if you get to know Alice in the book, you'll see how that devastated her. Being sarcastic. But she, what was interesting to me was that they didn't want a woman, obviously. It wasn't a token woman thing. But she was such a pioneer in her field that they just really wanted her because they wanted to learn and address this new field of medicine.
Yeah, because she was so damn good at it.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. She had a wonderful personal style, too. She was an incredibly intelligent, polite woman with a genteel manner. And so she succeeded sometimes in convincing factory owners and captains of industry to implement their own reforms. But as she put it, there would always be dark spots of neglect where vulnerable people were poisoned or maimed if the government didn't also play a role in overseeing things.
She and Dolores Huerta shared one thing across history, a kind of handoff-ish attitude towards the women's movement. We're going to look at that situation and talk a lot more about Dolores Huerta when we return. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster, and I'm speaking today to Karenna Gore about her new book, Lighting the Way, 9 Women Who Changed Modern America, a book about which Sally Bedell Smith, the author of Grace and Power, The Private World of the Kennedy White House, and she should know it, quote, at a time when celebrities too often occupy our attention. Oh, gosh, don't they? Karenna Gore reminds us of our debt to these brave women who defied convention to advocate social justice. Her stories bring to life a century, more than a century, of American history in a vivid and original way. Certainly, the book does that. And one of the common threads throughout the book, talking about these women, is the juggling of work and family. And it seems to me that Dolores Huerta did this in a rather convention-defying way.
Yes, indeed. Dolores Huerta had 11 children, and she was also out on the front lines organizing farm workers. She still is, but in those days especially, it was just a woman of enormous passion. She had the nickname La Pasionara for her the energy that she brought and the focus to the task of helping migrant farm workers who were certainly exploited, marginalized, often had no toilets or clean drinking water, asked to work terribly long hours in difficult circumstances and often not paid the wages that they had been promised. So she, along with her professional partner, Cesar Chavez, really worked to change that.
She, along with Alice Hamilton, shared a kind of, I'm not so sure it's all that important, attitude toward the women's movement. And I think you've just brought up one of the reasons why. That both she and Hamilton, if you'll forgive the expression, had bigger fish to fry. And this wasn't their main concern. Their main concern was social justice.
Well, I think it's true that was social justice was both of their main concern, and certainly is a theme in the book. I think in the case of Alice Hamilton, she felt that the suffrage movement had allied itself with the wrong allies. That being part of the temperance movement, as opposed to working for instance, to end child labor, which
why
is
she's one of my favorites.
Yeah, was something that she took issue with.
Yeah.
So she was pro-suffrage, certainly, but she was slightly alienated by the battles that some of the women within the suffrage movement picked, as opposed to her battles. And in the case of Dolores Huerta, she certainly came to as she called it, born again feminism later on in life. But she was very conservative Catholic Mexican American woman who felt some guilt about her own divorces, who was raising these 11 children, who didn't, in the beginning of her life and career, feel that the women's movement was speaking directly to her, but by the end really found great comfort in sharing her experiences with other women who had been through similar experiences.
Yeah, and there's a picture in the book of her with Gloria Steinem. But now let's get on to my favorite. Ida B. Wells Barnett, the woman who refused long before Rosa Parks to give up her seat.
Yes.
She did it in 1883 on a train, and she had bought a first-class ticket, and darn it, she was going to sit in the first-class seat. The conductor came to get her out of there, and she bit him.
Yeah, she fought back. She fought back physically at first, and the conductor, with the help of several other men, removed her as she was fighting back, and the other passengers cheered while that happened. She was furious and humiliated and brought legal action. And it's amazing that this single black woman in the Deep South had such conviction in 1883 that she would stand up for her rights then and try to overturn segregation. She was not ultimately successful, but devoted her life to fighting segregation and also to exposing and combating lynching, the routine torture and murder of black men, women, and children throughout the South. And she, as one contemporary put it...
One of the things that gets me about her, and perhaps about the other women as well, that, okay, I can't do this. She got fired from her teaching job for, I forget why, and it doesn't matter. And then she said, well, I'll be a writer, and I'll, quote, change the world, unquote, through my writing. And then she goes and she does it. And we're talking the 19th century. We're talking a black woman. To me, it's just amazing that she achieved as much as she did.
I agree. I think she was an extraordinary intellect of her day, and really did, as one contemporary put it, shake this country like an earthquake with her truth-telling journalism. And she very much believed in the power of the press to change public awareness.
One of the earthquake ventures involves riots in the South, 12 men in jail in Arkansas. And she goes and she talks to them after interviewing them. You have talked and sung and prayed about dying and forgiving your enemies and of feeling sure that you're going to be received in the New Jerusalem because your God knows that you are innocent of the offense for which you expect to be electrocuted. But why don't you pray to live and ask to be freed? That's my hero. That's the way she was.
Classic Ida B. Wells.
Yeah. Well, she's my hero. You can go pick out your own, but to do that, you're going to have to buy the book, Lighting the Way, 9 Women Who Changed Modern America by Karenna Gore. Schiff, this has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.